I wanted to start the meeting discussing the new approach which I sent out and see if everybody's in agreement with it. The new approach basically says, look, we all, instead of all of us having to get our drafts in at a particular time, why don't we stagger it and then work like 2 drafts a month. So I want to know if anybody has any comments on that approach and whether we should go forward with that approach. I heard.
I like it, Bob. I like it.
What?
I like it. This is Ann.
Okay.
I think it sort of gives you a clear deadline, and you know when you're on, and you've got a group of people you're going to talk to, and you're going to get some feedback on, and I think it's a smart approach to moving us forward.
And I think a chapter should be a Word document, double-spaced, probably 20 to 30 pages maximum. We don't want to have, 2-page chapter, unless, I don't know, I mean, some great PhD theses have actually been directed one equation on a page, and that was his PhD thesis, one of the greatest equations that ever happened. But we're not necessarily going to do that. So I would say keep it 20 to 30 pages of double-spaced. And any other comments on the approach? Maybe I can assume that we're all ready to go with that approach. So one of the things I want to get done is, before this meeting's over, for the writers to sort of determine when they want. Oh, my computer. Oh, no. That's my printer is having a terrible time. Okay. Well, funny because it just started printing after I put it in about 10 minutes ago. Okay, we're going to go with this approach. I want to talk a little bit more about the purpose and objective of this project. And let me share with you my view, and I'd like to hear everybody else. One of the things I'm learning about complexity is we're not exactly sure where we're going to end up. What I've heard from people is, regardless of whether we have a book or some blogs on the website or a video that will tell our stories to, however it ends up, I'm hearing from people that the conversation has been very valuable, especially this conversation about outcomes and adaptive vision. Really was very powerful for me. Got me to reading some books, and so I can't tell you exactly where we'll end up, but we're headed towards stories that illustrate complexity. So there are 3 aspects of the stories that I think are really important, and Brooke put them in the or on the website. And it is, a story has certain elements. First of all, it captures people. It's intriguing. It's not like an academic, complex treatises, but it's a story that hopefully will inspire people. The second thing is that the story has some sense of what happened. So most of you I've talked to said, I started this out, at least in my case, we started this out, and after 40 years, nothing had been done with the accidents that occurred by airplanes in Alaska. And by the end, we had installed a system that is now worldwide, even though we just started it for Alaska, that uses the GPS satellites to actually determine where planes are. And we cut the accident rate by 50%. And that was the first major progress after 40 years of people writing, project plans, et cetera. Nothing happened. So second part is, tell us something that happened. And if something happened, could actually be not much, or it could be that we got the community involved, or we got, something happened as a result of complexity. And the third part, you can either weave in or talk at the end, which is so what principles do you think happen? So when I wrote my chapter, there were a lot of principles about seeing the organization as a network rather than as a hierarchy. Having the trusting in the people, having really quick and open communications. So I see this in your stories too when I come through. So we will, and then at the end, I'm hoping the last chapter, we'll look at all these stories and say, hey, this is what looks common. So that's the nature of the book, and I want to know if we have sort of agreement on that approach.
That sounds fun to me.
Okay. Any?
I have one question.
Okay.
Let's suppose that within the last 6 months, there's been information out there that has changed my whole perception of what my life has been about. How do I frame that in a way that maybe at least I give the story to you folks, that maybe it even may reframe the way you look at what has happened in complexity. And so I'm trying to take it out of a historical story to a dynamic, emerging story that I think is happening right in front of us right now. Based in the science of quantum computing.
Say a little bit more, Bob.
Well, there's new research. One just came out yesterday on bacterium being able to superposition 6 atoms, and that allows for photosynthesis to happen. Google now has just put in the ability to superposition 74 qubits to allow superpositioning of information so that one can dance in a structure that new things can emerge. And so it is putting quantum physics of why we have been struggling with complexity our whole life. And it's being reframed into a new world that is happening in quantum computing and is happening in the awareness of how biology works. So these are things that these are things I'm trying to frame my story around, which gives me so much more power to appreciate the philosophical history of what I've experienced and what I think has happened across time. So it's just a small idea, but
Sounds like a big idea.
Yeah, who's the reader?
Yeah.
How we describe a persona for the reader?
The reader would be a parent who has, for me, it would be a parent who has a child who would have the ability to frame it in whatever way they love their child so that they could thrive in the world around us, where you have a group like Google capturing 74 qubits to map your behaviors so that they can put things in front of you. And so that's who my audience would be those folks out there who have children.
So, wouldn't a parent's eyes glaze over as soon as you mentioned the word qubits?
Well, right. No, they would never hear qubits.
Okay.
Because my job was to introduce ability of someone who had severe cerebral palsy. My job was to do what Peter's talking about, put complexity all around them and see how awareness emerged for that child we thought had no ability at all.
So I have a suggestion.
Yeah, sorry I talked too much. I'm
I think it's wonderful, but I have a suggestion here. And the suggestion revolves around either something like an epilogue or an emergent future. Now, maybe that's the last chapter. Maybe that is an addendum to each chapter if need be, specific to that chapter. But if we maintain or stick to the view that we're going to tell a story in each chapter along the guidelines we spoke about before and that Mark reviewed again. So as things develop or come to light that maybe aren't the story but are sort of epilogues or aftermath or new emergent learnings, maybe we just capture them that way and write to them that way. And some of them might belong in an overall epilogue chapter, and some of them might just be an addendum to the chapter after it's written. I don't know what that looks like yet, but that's a thought.
I really like that, Brooke, because when you're building, designing, and flying something at the time, you don't have the knowledge and awareness. You sort of just do. And then after the fact, you can reflect and you can sort of add that epilogue piece. So it would be nice to tell the story and then maybe in some cases where it exists, be able to reflect on that. And
if we look at all the chapters after they're done, maybe there is an overall emergent epilogue.
I would guess that there's a thread. I'm going to guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully. That would be nice if there was.
Well, I think David asked a very important question, which is who are we writing for?
Yeah.
And I'd like to discuss that a little bit because I think it then frames what should be in the chapters and how they should be written. So I think we're not writing for complexity scientists and we're not writing for scholars at this point. I think we're writing for anybody dealing with a complex problem. So, it could be a parent. So a parent could be reading your chapter, Bob. It could be a manager in an organization where there's turmoil in their organization and people are trying to make sense of it. It could be for us to give our clients something to read. So I think it has to be at a level that, and I agree, I think if we want complex or theoretical stuff or models or whatever, we can put them in epilogues, or we can put them, where people can read it if they want to go to another depth. But the chapter should be one that I think is something that is plain, as Barb just said, plain language for anyone working with a complex problem. I just think that's a funded foundation. Any more? Susan?
I describe my audience as reflective practitioners. These are people who are actually in practice, but are reflecting on their experience and are interested in using different lenses for understanding their predicament. So, I mean, I think it's a mythical beast, actually, because my impression is that either you reflect or you practice. It's very difficult to get people who can actually do both or even alternate them. But yes, that's the thought.
And what I was going to say is it iterates, but adds, I think adds to what you're saying in reflecting, practicing, but it sounds like each of our stories applies it. So it's taking it from the theoretical to the application of complexity science, and here is how it's been applied, and here's how you can actually rethink how you perceive and your worldview. I mean your worldview, how you apply it. I know for me, what's been valuable is after Mark and I talked, and he gave me insights into how he viewed structure, and I actually came up with a diagram, a visual that that if anybody's interested, I'll send it to them. But it actually kind of explains the complexity of structure and strategy, and and how a lot of times our strategy to survive overrides those strategies that we write down. And we, structure follows strategy. So if you understand what's going on in the structure, you actually can roll it back to the strategy, both individually and organizationally. And I will say that I have completely changed what I want to write about. So what I have online is, I've thrown that out. So that's not even relevant anymore.
Hey,
I also think as we start evolving who our audience is, we have to also reflect on what we think the Plexus brand is. And the Plexus brand has been about applying complexity thinking to organizations so that we're not academics, we are practitioners. And I think it was Anne who said that when you're in the middle of everything, you don't have time to reflect, you just build the airplane. And that it has been how Plexus has gone about using complexity thinking and complexity theories. Actually, Sharon, could you sort of...
Oops.
Oh, you're on mute. Barb, you're on.
Bob, you're on mute.
Sharon, do you mind stepping in on this since you're a long history with Plexus?
Yes, but I can hear, I've just lost your first name, Rolter. Brooke, thank you. I was going to say Brad, and I knew that wasn't right.
I go by a lot of things.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
But I could see you were trying to say something, and then, yes, I'm happy to weigh in.
Yeah, sorry. What I was going to tie back to an earlier conversation we had and the question that was raised earlier about the audience. And my view is it's extraordinarily easy for any of us to start writing and using language that is wrapped in and consumed in the knowledge or language of complexity. And while I agree with that the audience is kind of people that are maybe dealing with a complex system or complex problem, I think a major piece of that is they don't need to understand that they are doing it. You don't need
they're
them
not
to
even
define
good,
it.
if in my case, it was amazing in the conversation that I was using this, and I said, I had never heard of it. And then when I went and looked at the Plexus Institute website, I said, oh yeah, that is what I do. So people you don't know what you don't know. And so I think that the glory of this process is telling the story and then applying the theory behind it. Those of you that are well-versed and understand the theory, you can now use it in a very sophisticated way. Those of us that don't sort of fumble through it. And so that's sort of the message that I'd love to get out, at least in my chapter, is you don't have to know it, but boy, if you did, it'd make life a whole lot easier.
So one of the thoughts that kind of helps me in this conversation and thinking about it is, am I trying to write to an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 20-year-old, or a 50-year-old? And I think if that might be one that helps me. So it might be worthwhile a minute to say, what age is our target? Because I think that helps us figure out how we need to word and write things.
Yeah.
Sharon?
Sorry. So as we were navigating that question and the question of who's going to read this book, why would anybody buy these books about adaptive positive deviance, which sounds so crazy anyway? And we kept going back to some core principles that I think illuminate Plexus's work across a lot of time and different projects, which is, we're going to go try some things. We're based in theory. We're going to do the good, hard, reflective work of seeing where the theory and the practice match or don't match. But the thing we're going to be really rigorous about is pulling out the principles to make the principles accessible for other practitioners who are smart enough to apply them on their own. So that there's a real assumption. For me, there has always been a deep assumption in Plexus that that people who are attracted to Plexus are smart enough to figure out how to apply the principles if you give them to them. that you don't have to talk down to your reader. That if you, yeah. So I don't know, Prusha, Denise, anybody want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think you're right. You don't have to talk down at all. And while Brooke's right that you should avoid overdoing jargon, this brings up another thing that I think would be really important to agree on is we have several different authors with a lot of different kinds of experience. I think we should, this touches on, talk about documentation, because if we don't have some agreement in advance on documentation, there can be a huge amount of scrambling at the end to figure out where this came from and what it is and whether it's reliable. There are all kinds of things that are fabulously reliable, and there's a lot of scholarship, but we should figure out how we're going to document where this stuff came from, and just so that when we get to the end of it, we don't have to scramble around trying to figure out, is this reliable, is this real, where does it come from, is it a website that doesn't exist anymore? And we can do that in part by choosing a format for how to use the documentation. And we might end up deciding different ways of how you want to document. You might want to have documentation at the end of each chapter. You might want to have a documentation at the end. But I just think we need to talk about documentation as we're writing or before we start writing, so that everybody's kind of on the same page with it.
Hey, Prusha, have you done this before?
Yeah. Yeah, I've done the scrambling part.
Would you send out what you've done before as a starting point?
What do you mean?
What I mean is, could you start out? You've already done some of this work for previous documents.
Oh, you mean for just for things that we should agree on in advance, so we don't have a lot of trouble.
Send it out so at some future meeting we could all, comment on it and then maybe agree on it.
Okay.
That would be wonderful, because I know you've been working with this team. It's kind of the thing that people don't want to deal with early on, but I think you're right. It just helps a lot if we had some guidelines to help us.
Yeah, we certainly need some style pointers. For instance, I use diagrams prolifically, and I assume we can accommodate those.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it is a good idea to set off and give your references. We can always exclude them from the end, but if we need to check the validity of a reference, or that's important that it be in the first draft.
Yeah. It's hard. It's sometimes misunderstandings can arise between different scholars or people with different points of view when you're trying to take very, very difficult concepts like attractors, say, and trying to put it into layman's language. Sometimes you do need to go over whether your presentation is an accurate reflection, and it helps if you know what references you've been using to arrive at the layman's language.
And Bruce, you had done a diagram. I think, weren't you the one that did the mind map?
What did the mind map?
Yeah. And
I'm adding to it every time.
Yeah, I found that to be very helpful. I mean, that probably, are you going to update that? Because that kind of, especially if we were able to mind map the different concepts we're using, that would help me to, one, use the same language, because I think there are some language things that, are so similar that if we use different words for it, that it might cause confusion that is unnecessary.
Right. I am adding to it now as we speak, but a fair amount of what I'm hearing in this conversation goes to the actual mechanics of writing and reviewing. Okay. And pulling out the documentation, writing the references. In my view, it even goes to are we going to write this in Google Docs, each chapter in Google Docs? Are we going to write it in Word And when people go to provide review comments, are they providing it in Word or Google Docs or in PDF form? Because that can be either, well, those come up. And not to be at all be restrictive about this or prescriptive, but I think if we're having more than 3 people work on this and review things, we need to have some agreement on how we're going to at least do the software aspect of it.
Another option would actually be use a platform like GitHub. So, we're not just working in individual documents, that we're actually working in a conversational flow around the documents.
I'm wondering if the people who are not writing chapters could spend a little time trying to put together the some of these guidelines for us. Barb?
That would be helpful for those of us who do it.
I know, Pusha, you're writing a chapter, but you've had so much experience. Sharon, do you have experience in so
I'll weigh in with 2 thoughts. One, I loathe trying to do manuscripts by emailing Word documents. It's clunky. It's right. Thank you.
Yeah.
My encouragement to the group is learn Google Docs, become proficient at it, and make that at least one of your platforms. Partly because as you get further down the road and as you move from stitching this thing together into the design phase, it makes it much easier to track your versions. Version control is such a huge problem. So that's one thing. The second thing I'd say comes out of a bad experience. I was a co-author, and I think I'm pretty good at what I do, but I was a co-author on what turned out to be a very poor chapter in an earlier Plexus book. And there wasn't really a mechanism within the group for saying, you know what, this isn't quite what we were looking for. It doesn't fit very well. It's not in the right voice. So the group needs to have some ability. Either you're charging one person with being the lead author and quality who's willing to have that conversation with the various chapter authors, or it's a group decision and then you guys have got to sort of own up, right? I'm sorry that thing is in print and it bugs me. So, yeah. And what are you going to do if somebody can't meet their commitments, right? So that kind of, maybe you've already talked about all of this.
no.
So,
So let me suggest, following up, Mark, on your suggestion, if Barb, Prusha, and Sharon, if the 4 of us want to schedule like a half-an-hour call or a Zoom, we can probably cover the basics of this.
Yeah.
And at least get a foothold for it.
Yeah.
That'd be
That works.
great.
Brooke, can you take the lead in organizing that?
I will set that time up
Okay, wonderful.
sometime next year. Just kidding.
Might not be a joke.
No.
Okay.
And I'm just waiting in with what Sharon said about principles of just having some academic, or having principles that we would be basing our information on. And looking at my chapter, I tried to bring information. I just have one principle that I'm trying to add to the Plexus principles. So it's important to see if there's any validity in principles that people are putting forward, or having that common understanding of what complexity is. So
let me share with you my vision of this, which is I'm not so sure each chapter will have the same principles. But I'm hoping that after we all write the chapters, we all read the chapters and we all get together and we say, now what's common across all these chapters? Because if we try to make every chapter use exactly the same principles, it takes away from our own personal understanding. So it could be that seeing the organization as a network rather than as a hierarchy is something that pervades.
Mm-hmm.
It could be that certain things are just unique to that chapter. You know,
I should say I review a lot of management books, and frankly, principles or management principles are the bane of my life, because what you get is a lot of truisms which on examination turn out to be desirable outcomes. You can't argue with them because they are desirable, but the whats are generic, the hows are specific. This is the essence of complexity theory, is that every organization is unique because history matters, context matters, narrative matters, and what works in one situation does not work in another. So I am so tired of reviewing books that have 7 principles and they're all true and they're all useless.
well, let me share with you. That's why I'm focusing on the stories rather than the principles. But it is interesting as I read through, listen to different people's stories. I see some things that are very common. So we don't have to call them truths, or these are the things you have to do. But we can say, hey, seeing an organization as a network rather than a hierarchy is something that seems to work pretty well. What does that mean? Well, the stories will illustrate what they mean. But so I don't want to avoid the issue of, hey, is there something common about these stories? But I don't want us to each have to write in such a way that we all know what that is in the beginning, and then we have to write a certain language that fits each one of those. So I'm willing for the stories to be fluid to some degree, but if we come up with some aha moments at the end, and again, I don't want them to be written as, follow these 7 steps and nirvana. Here's the observations that we had.
Right.
Does that work, David, for you?
Yeah, I think so. And even a story, when you read a story, you're always thinking about your own situation. You're always trying to refer, what does this mean for me? And what it means for me is quite different from what someone else might take away from it. And I mean, I think this is the essence of why executives read biography and history and novels, because they never know what they're going to get that's relevant to their experience. And then, and there's no principles they extract from it, but it's a vocabulary for practice again. It's, here was somebody in this situation which rather resembles mine, and they did that, and maybe I should think about doing something like that. And it's you see, I'm big into what I see as the Anglo-American engineering mindset, and some of my best friends are engineers. But when I take an engineering principle like F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration, that refers to a cause and effect in a particular situation that is true everywhere. So I can use that as a principle. As soon as I get into the human world, all that falls apart. And you're in here in this situation right here, right now. What do I do? Well,
so I think this reinforces the conversation we had last time, and let me try to bridge both the cause and effect and the ambiguity here. If I think about a broad timeline, a Gantt chart for this, up front now, if we just write each chapter according to what the author views are, from what we talked about before about, tell the story, the approach, what came out of it, the implications, and what kind of your takeaways are from it. And then downstream, when we get the chapters written, we can see them all. Then we can have the conversation about what has emerged from this, of commonalities, of any principles, or conflicts of principles handled in different ways. So I'm thinking, what I'm really suggesting is this conversation about whatever comes out of this is downstream.
I I hope
And
somebody's writing a book or a chapter about this process, because this is fascinating. It really is. This is what we're talking about. We are applying complexity theory to this.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and we don't know what's emerging yet, but we know what emerges is going to be the point of the conversation.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the word, conversation. I mean, that's, you know.
So there might be, I would like to personally get a little bit more framework, speaking of this process of what we mean by, we've switched the whole context from outcomes to the emerging future. So what does that mean for people?
That's a good question, and I was something I left off the agenda, but we've made a very big switch from the word outcomes to visionary adaptive vision,
Which was a relief, because it did appear that which
Yes.
actually is worth a chapter in and of itself, that there is a lot of ambiguity around the word outcomes.
and so what I learned from that, and Connie turned me on to a book, Getting to Maybe, which really influenced me very heavily in understanding this, is that an outcome has the impression of we have a roadmap. It's very mechanical. You know, we do this step, we do that step, and somehow we arrive at this place and we've solved the problem, or we can measure the problem. And so everybody then looks at, oh, you know, you said you were going to be here at this point, but you're not here at this point. Something's wrong. Now, I hadn't meant it that way when I opened it up. I meant it as a vision. But the point is, the word has a lot of it. Adaptive vision means, you know, I want to get somewhere, which is it is specific in the sense that, you know, I want to reduce opioid addiction. So you might start out with, why is it adaptive? Well, because you might start out with the idea that that's the only thing I want to do, but then you might find out that in dealing with opioid addiction, if you don't deal with issues of poverty and hopelessness and psychological fear and anxiety, that you're not going to get there. So you might have, you know, I want to deal with the causes of opioid, whatever it is. You actually, as you're moving forward, your actual vision can change too, and that ought to be part of the process. So, you know, in my case, the adaptive vision is the future of Alaska without having airplanes crash. Not hard, I mean, but it's, you know, it doesn't say exactly how I'm going to get there, and it doesn't imply that I have a roadmap, and it says we're all committed to this. In some sense, an adaptive vision is a tractor. We talk about chaotic systems having an attractor. Well, we all sort of believe in this thing, okay? And so we all sort of know that we're trying to head in this direction. We don't know how to get there. So that was my profound understanding of, and that's why so we may have to write in the beginning of the book what we mean by adaptive vision.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in the mechanical world, it's all cause and effect. In the complex world, it's all about purpose and intent, and narrative, and all those kinds of things. But you mentioned Brenda Zimmerman's work. I worked with her, and I'm going to circulate to the group her 9 principles from Edgeware. Is everybody aware of those, or would it be useful to have them?
I don't have them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're wonderful.
Yeah, and they are they're kind of aid memoirs, I would describe them. I mean, they're not Newtonian, you know, things handed down from heaven. They are, you know, intelligent things to do on the ground. You know, when you're at a loss, she says, you know, lead with clockware, lead with swarmware. You know, what's clockware and swarmware? But anyway, I'll circulate those. yeah, they're much less pretentious than principles, which, you know, is an attempt to be axiomatic and scientific. No, it's guides to judgment, vocabulary for action. I mean, that's what I'm thinking of as a very lowercase principle.
I want to second that emotion. I had just sent Prusha a private note saying, hey, have you got the Edgeware principles? I use them many times a year for orienteering. It's how I go back to that probably 4 to 6 times a year to think about where am I? Where am I right now, and where do I think things are emerging directionally? They are wonderful. So, yep.
Okay, they will be on their way to you in a moment.
Wonderful.
Great.
Everybody, please.
I want to segue now to the action plan. So we have one action plan, which Brooke is going to try to, with a group of people, to set up some guidelines for how we write the chapters. The next guideline is setting up a schedule for when we're going to do chapters. Connie said she'd like to be early. Bob, you wanted to be early, or does it matter? Bob, you're on mute. Bob, you're on mute.
I would just as soon hold off.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Connie wants to be early. So tell me, Jess, do you want to be early, medium, or late? Okay.
What's early? What
Okay,
is that?
Early is the next 3 months. Medium is from 3 to 5, and late is 5 to 7. I'm hoping to get the thing done in about 7 months.
Okay.
And the question is, do we skip December because everybody's busy in December? So we think we ought to skip December because, and just
Yeah, I agree. We got to skip December. I'll go anywhere because I've told my stories several times in books and articles and so on. So I've got it in good order, and I have a fairly clear idea of which pieces I want to use in here.
Okay, so you're going to be early.
Use me wherever you need someone to go.
I'm going to be early. Connie's going to be early, so we have 3 earlies.
I'll be late.
I'd like a medium early.
Yeah.
It is medium.
Medium early be good for me too.
What did you say? Medium?
Medium or medium early.
Okay.
Look, you weren't going to get a group of people that weren't going to be complex, Bob. Mark.
Susan?
Medium late.
Okay.
A medium rare on the steak.
Bob, I'm going to put you medium late too.
Okay.
I'm going to send you guys something I found that adds a little bit of structure. And I'll give this to the planning committee, and if you guys find it helpful, then you can send it out. But it's called Pink Sheets, and it's just a way that you kind of list out context, concept, and content, and you include your story. And that might be a way for us to kind of pull out the context of what we're talking about, and that may help get a little bit of structure to our stories.
Peter, you're still interested? Peter?
Yeah, early, yeah.
Are you interested in writing a chapter or just?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do it, and I'd prefer to do it early.
Do you have an idea of what you want to write?
I've probably already written most of it.
Oh, that's right. You're the one I read. I was so fascinated by what you were writing about because I just told my wife, I said, some things are so ingrained that, all schools are by age that you never even think about another way. It reminds me of Einstein when he was like 13 or 14, who said, well, if the laws of physics are right, time might have to change. Well, nobody could conceive of the idea that time would change. I mean, it was just inconceivable. Well, it's kind of the same thing with you in schools. It's like, of course schools are organized by age. It's just So it's just
I
fascinating.
gotta jump off, guys. I got another back-to-back call.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Great meeting. Okay,
All right,
so
bye-bye.
Peter, you're an early. Okay, I'm going to take this stuff and try to set some deadlines and send them out and see what we'll do. And we'll get together sort of sometime in the mid-November timeframe just to review where we are. And yes, Susan.
Can you take that time frame that we just said and put it into some months so
Yes,
we can?
that's exactly what I'm going to do. Actually, months and days. So I'm going to try to set some time and I'll put that on the website and send it out. And I'd like to meet sometime end of November, right after Thanksgiving. And so, Brooke, if your group could have something ready by then, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm traveling 24th of November to 11th December, so I won't be available.
Okay. Well, Denise, where does this go, this recording, so I can tell people? Are you going to send me the link for it, and I can send people out and tell them that
I will send the link for it, and I can actually start a channel on YouTube so everyone in the group can easily access it if that's easy, or I can just send the link to you. Whatever is best.
And is there a need for any additional people? I mean, should we recruit people for other things that are needed? Or are
We need a chef.
mistakes?
Just the length of the book. I think, Mark, when we chatted, you said 7,500 words you felt each chapter would be?
Well, I said now 20 to 30
pages, double spaced. So yeah. What's that? I don't know.
I think that's pretty close to 7,500 words. 300 words a page, or is that double space less?
I think double space would be less, but
let me see, 30 times.
Single space is about 350 words a page. So
okay.
Double space would be about 175. So I think you're looking at less than 7,500. That's my point?
Yeah, I think so too. 100, about 5,000 words.
Yeah, about 5,000. So I think maybe that should be the target.
Yeah, about 5,000.
And that's not a huge amount of space, for at least for what I have in mind. But that's okay. I can. That's all right.
Well, some can be a little smaller, some can be a little larger. We'll
okay.
Write it within that context. But if you need to go to 7,500 or 2,500, just
first draft could run long. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any final words? I'm very excited by the project. I'm excited by this team. As I say, if we never do anything else, we've learned a lot from each other already. But we're going to do some more. And the idea also is, as we get a chapter done, we're going to put it on the website. And then people can comment on it from outside, and then we'll be able to take comments, and then we'll get some more interest. The other thing is, I can see this as a tool for Plexus. If people are consulting or something like that, they can give people real stories. Okay. Any final words?
Yes.
We're all pretty happy.
Question.
Yes.
Prusha, Barb, Sharon, do you want to stick on for 30 seconds?
Yep.
Or schedule?
Okay. Great meeting.
Okay. Thanks, folks.
Denise.
Time to talk sometime.
What?
I would just, Denise, do you hear?
What'd you say? I can't hear you.
I was just asking if Denise heard me.
Is Denise here?
Mm-hmm.
Denise, this is Bob. Do you hear me?
Yes.
I was just wondering if you had time for that conversation sometime.
Yes. Why don't we talk right now? If you can just give me, put in your cell phone number, I'll give you a call. How's that?
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
Hey, everybody.
Bye.